Hey everyone, welcome to our Godot 4.6 Fundamentals crash course. So what we're going to be doing throughout this course is learning how to first of all install Godot 4.6 or the most stable version at the time you're watching this course, and then we'll also learn how to do the basics of game development essentially. So what we're going to do is kind of make a game where we can just practice working with creating a UI, creating a basic map, and then just working with collisions and GDScript in general, just so you can get a grasp on, again, the fundamentals. And then once you do have a grasp of some of these fundamentals and how everything interacts, it should give you a little bit more confidence to learn to create your own games from scratch. So to get started, of course, what we're going to do is learn how to install Godot from their website. And to do that, of course, I just Google Godot, then you can just go to godotengine.org. And from here, you can see that there's an option to download the latest, but you can also go to the top bar and click download if you want to take a look at all the versions. So in our case, we're doing it for Godot 4.6, so I'll go ahead and click on experimental releases, and then we go ahead and download the most recent version. Again, if you want something that is just the stable version, just look for the most recent one, which should be on their front page. The download process is exactly the same, but either way, you're just going to go ahead and click download on the one that you want. And then it should, after a while, I guess you should select what platform you're going to be using it on. And of course, in our case, we're going to be using Windows. But if you're on Mac, you would, of course, select that. So again, you go ahead and click Standard. And then it should go ahead and install a zip file to your computer. So what we're going to do now is just wait until that is downloaded. So after a little bit of time, you're going to be presented with, of course, inside of your downloads folder, I just moved to a separate folder for the time being, a compressed file. So again, if you go ahead and just double click on this, you can go ahead and look at the contents. So as you can see here, there's just the main program for Godot and then a console. So what you're going to do then is just, of course, extract it to whatever folder you want. It's kind of the nice thing about Godot here. We don't actually have to install anything. It's just a nice executable and you can place it wherever you want. Okay, so you can go ahead and just click extract all and then just stick it in here. And then, yeah, now we have this nice folder that we can go ahead and run Godot for our first time. Okay, so we go ahead and just click on the .exe. And then sometimes, since it's not a stable version, it might give you a little bit of a warning. But of course, since we know that it is okay, we can go ahead and just run it anyways. And there we go. We're inside of our Godot project. And now what we need to do is learn, our Godot project manager. So now we just need to figure out, well, how do we actually make a project? And this part shouldn't be too hard. We just go ahead to the top left, and we can go ahead and just click create. So again, I'm just going to call this Godot Fundamentals Recording. And then you can go ahead and determine on which folder you actually want to place it in. Right now, it's just going to place it in your default documents folder, but you can go ahead and just change that if you want. And then once you are ready, you can go ahead and choose what kind of renderer you want to do, depending on the game you want to make. You can go ahead and just read these details, but for the time being, we're just going to leave it at /. And then when you're done, you go ahead and click Edit Now, which means it'll open the editor when you're done. And then you can go ahead and just click Create. So now that our project is created and opened, you should be presented with a window similar to this. So essentially right now, this is an overview of what your game looks like right now in a 3D perspective. And at the top bar, you can see all of the options for different windows you can go to. So you can see our 2D window. This is what your 2D game is going to look like. This is what the 3D looks like. This is your script editor window. So when we start making scripts, this is where they'll be stored, and we can just switch between them and edit inside of here. And then you can see the game button. This is just like a game preview, and then the asset library, which we won't be messing with too much. But you can take a look through this, and you can see some of the asset libraries that are available. But either way, for the time being, we can just test and mess around with that if you've never seen it before. And then there's also this values at the top left. And this, of course, is just your settings for any other program. We will frequently be going into the project settings to set up things such as keybinds or just window settings. And there's also such thing as editor settings where you can change, your display scale. So if things appear a little bit bigger, you can change your font size to make it more readable, appearance, etc., etc. But again, we're not going to mess with any of that, but you can go in there if that is something you are interested in. So with that in mind, we learned how to install Godot and create our first project. And now I think we'll just wrap it up to keep things more modular. And in the next video, we'll start building off of these concepts to learn how to build our first game. So we'll discuss what we are going to accomplish with said game, and then we'll start taking the initial steps to actually get there. So the first step I think we're going to be discussing is just how to work with a basic user interface. But yeah, that's for another video. So I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one when we start on our game. Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome back to our Godot Fundamentals course. In the last video, we just focused on how to install and create our first project. And now we're going to be working with our first scene, as well as just running it. So essentially starting our game. So for the concept of the game, what I'm thinking about doing is a simple game where we just have a pot at the bottom of the level, and it's just trying to catch objects that are falling. And then as time progresses, the falling gets quicker and quicker. If you ever miss one of the objects, so it hits the ground before you catch it, then the game's over. And the whole concept is just to last for as long as possible. And I think that's just a good way to learn not only about key bindings, but also basic movement, as well as collisions, all while programming in GDScript. And of course, we're also going to have a main menu for when you start the game, so you can quit out or start playing. And then we'll have a game over screen such that when you lose, it'll show your score. And then again, you'll have the choice to play again or be brought to the main menu. So I can just show you guys the thought process or the flow of moving between scenes to give it a more complete feel. But now, if you look at the left side here, you can see we have nothing selected, right? We had this 2D option selected, but it's just empty, as you can see, the name empty. And what I'm going to do first, inside of this res // folder, is just create two folders to make things a little bit more organized. So the first one is going to be called scenes, and then I'm also going to make another one called scripts. All right, that's going to where our Godot scripts are going to be held. And I'll even make a third called pictures or images in the event that we actually use more advanced textures. I don't think we'll get too much into that because I just want to focus on actually building the game. But we'll see how far we get. But now, what we're going to do is inside of this empty, we're going to go ahead and just click user interface. Because again, that is what we're trying to make. And an even better way to do this, honestly, is just to close out of this. And then inside of scenes, we'll right click and then create new and then call this a scene. And then we can select what type you want it to be. I'll give it a user interface name, and then I'll go ahead and just call this our main menu. Okay, and then inside of our main menu, I can go ahead and press play. It's going to say no main scene has ever been defined. I'm going to select the current as our main. So now whenever we hit this play button, it's always going to open up to the main menu as its first choice. Again, right now it's blank and nothing is going on, but that's okay. So now we need to figure out, well, what's inside of a main menu. So the first thing we're going to need, of course, is like a title, maybe an icon if we want to mess around with images. And then, of course, we need buttons to actually start the game or quit to desktop. So, okay, how do we actually do that? And this is where this window at the top left comes in hand. So right now, there's only one button in here, this green circle, and it's called main menu. And when it's called control, this has to deal with user interface, a control node. So essentially, it is the right type right now. So now, in order to actually add elements to make this look more appealing and actually have functionality, we're just going to right click on it and select add child node. And as you can see here, if we scroll around, there are a ton of options of what we can add to this main menu node. Okay, and again, they all have their own UI, their own functionality, their own settings. So of course, we can't really go through all of them, but the first thing we're going to look at is something called, we'll just call it a center container. And you see the center container, it just makes sure that all the elements inside of it are centered at their minimum size. So again, you can just read the description of each one and then see what's right for you. And you can also Google what you're looking for. There's a good chance Godot has it built in. So now we just have this big center container. It doesn't really help us though. We need to add more elements to it. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on that and look for something called a VBox container. And that just means vertical box. So every time I add an element to this vertical box, it'll stack it vertically, meaning up and down. To show you what I mean, I can add another child node. So we're just going to keep going. You see it's kind of a tree structure. I'm going to add something called a label this time. And this essentially just is text. So then we can go ahead and name it our first game. And of course, on the right side, you can see there's something called an inspector. That's where we can just mess with the specific settings of a node. So again, inside the label, it gives us a text option because we're allowed to edit text inside of it. While the VBox container, we don't have that same functionality, but it gives us an option for alignment, kind of like how you do with Flexbox, if you ever worked with web design. But now we have our label called our first game, and inside of the same vertical box, we want some buttons below it. Okay, do they have a button? We just go ahead, add a node, and then, yeah, you can see it does have a button node. And just likewise, it also has text. So inside of it, I'll say play game. Again, I can zoom in a little because it's a little hard to see. So this is what we're dealing with right now. Since it's in a VBox container, it's getting stacked vertically. We have one button called play game. Then we'll go ahead and add another button and go ahead and type in here, quit to desktop or editor in our case. And the best thing you should do whenever you have variables that you know you're going to be messing with is just rename them and give them a descriptive name. So I'm going to call this one the play button. And then I'm going to right click on the second one, rename it as well. And I'm going to call it the quit button. As you can see here now, we have essentially everything we need for our main menu. But of course, we might add a couple other things. So I'm going to zoom out now. As you can see, there's a bunch of boxes going on right now. And essentially what's going on with these boxes, this blue one here is the viewport. So inside of our project settings, we don't really have to worry about it right now, but under project settings and window, this is our default game size, right? 1152 by 648. You can also see that by pressing the play button. You can see there's a whole bunch of white space around our menu, and that's just encapsulating this blue line here. So now we need to figure out, well, it's a main menu, it should probably be in the center of our game. Well, how do we do that? And that's kind of the beauty of a control node. A control node, we can go ahead and click on our main menu, and then we can go ahead and click on layout. As you can see here, it doesn't have a parent because it's the root node, but you can see that it has something called a layout mode. Okay, and right now it says uncontrolled and anchors preset, and the anchor says it's a full rectangle. And what that means is that essentially this root node is expanding our whole window, okay, which is exactly what we want. If we change it to something like top right, you can see that it just kind of squishes itself to the top right of our screen. What we want to do is say our root container, main menu, takes up our whole screen. And the reason for that is we can go to our center container now, go to layout, make sure layout mode is anchors, and then we can go ahead and just center it. And it's going to center it with respect to its parent. The parent takes up the whole screen, so the center of the whole screen will give us exactly what we want, the center of our game. So we go ahead and click play, and there you go. Everything is centered as intended. Of course, there's a couple other settings we haven't really gone through. You can also try searching at the top if there's a setting that you have in mind. So maybe I have something called font size. You can click through everything. Oh, here we go. Underneath theme overrides, you can see there's a font size. We can go ahead and click on it. We can change the font to 22 pixels. And then you can go ahead and try doing the same thing for the buttons. You can just search up font, and they'll have settings where you can change what they look like. You can also change the color, the overlap, animations, etc. That's not something we need to worry about right now. Last but not least, I think our game menu looks pretty bland right now, so maybe we want to just add some color to it. So how do we add color? Go ahead and click Add Child Node. We're going to add something called a color rectangle. All right, this is just a background color. Okay, so like we discussed, we go to Layout, and now we're going to set it to anchors. Well, right now we can manually drag it to fit our blue rectangle by just dragging these guys around. But of course, we can just go ahead and set it to full rectangle. Well, that's great, but now it's kind of covering our entire menu. Then again, this just kind of gets into knowing which settings to change. In our case, we will want to change something called the Z index or ordering. Okay, so right now everything is on layer 0, but if you change something to be layer -1 or increase the ordering of the text and all the buttons to be a higher number, it just places them in front. So we're putting it at layer -1. And then of course we should probably change the color of it, so we get rid of the filter, and then you can go ahead and just try messing with colors. You can put in a hex number, but in our case I'm just going to make it a dark teal. why not? And with that in mind, we more or less have our own menu. So I guess the one last thing that we can try adding before we wrap up this video is our icons. And then of course, I guess we'll also set ourselves up for changing to our actual game and coding to desktop. So let's go ahead now and just add a simple picture to the top. So like a logo for your game, etc. It can be anything, but I just quickly found an icon for a Mammoth Club. It's a PNG format. And then I went ahead and just drug it in here manually. So I just went from my documents or my pictures folder, and then you just drag it in. And yeah, it should import automatically. So now how do we actually add this to our game? We go ahead and do something called a sprite 2D. Again, you don't need to know too much about this right now, but on the inspector side, you can see there's a texture option. I'll go ahead and just drag that image as one of the textures. And as you can see here, since it's not a control, we don't have the same features as before where we can just anchor it to the left side. So again, you can try looking up anchoring. You can see here, if it's a green node, a control node, there's an anchors preset. But in this case, since it's a sprite, we can't actually do that. So what we'd actually have to do is just select it and then actually drag it into the center of our screen. Okay, so again, it's a little bit different. You might have to do some manual tweaking, or of course you can just do some basic math. So you know the width of your screen, and then you just offset it by a certain amount of pixels. But of course, that's assuming that your screen size is going to be the same every time. Okay, so now with that in mind, I think that's more or less going to do it for our menu. So again, you can just try clicking through all of these settings if you want. But yeah, it just takes a little bit of time to find the settings that you want. But the search property at the top should make things easy for what we're trying to accomplish. So now what we're going to do is just go ahead and do some additional setting up for our next video. So the first thing we're going to do is go into our scenes, and we're going to go ahead and make a couple more scenes. So the first scene that we're going to make is going to be called, I guess we can make it with respect to our entire game. We'll call it our game scene, because that's where we're going to be going to. And then instead of a user interface, this time it's going to be a 2D scene. So you can go ahead and just click OK whenever you give the name you want. And then of course it's going to open it up. We don't really care about it right now. And then we're going to go ahead and make ourselves a script for our main menu. Because of course right now we have these buttons. We have no way to get to our new game scene when we press those buttons. So in order to do that, we're going to have to do something called using GDScript. And in order to attach it to a scene, all you have to do is right-click on our root node. Of course, it's not always going to be your root node, but in this case it is. And then what you're going to do is right-click it and just click Attach Script. And what it's going to do is just take its name, put an underscore between the camel cases in my case. You can name it whatever you want. But again, try to make it match the name of the actual scene to keep things organized. Again, it's going to ask if you want a built-in script. You can turn that on or off. I'm just going to leave everything as default, and then just click Create. And as you can see here, it just opens up our script tab at the top that we discussed in the first video. So if you want to go back to the actual scene, you just have to click between the two. But either way, I'm going to make sure I drag the main menu.gd into the scripts folder just to keep it organized how I like it. And with that in mind, I think that's going to more or less do it for this video. Not only did we learn how to play our first game, run our game for the first time, we also learned how to just make a basic UI and work with controls and learn how the node system works. Again, it's going to take a little bit of practice, but essentially all you need to know is that you have one main root node, which contains everything, and then you can go ahead and just add different types of children depending on what goals you're trying to accomplish. So we just have a basic container for centering all the contents. Then we have a vertical box container for stacking things vertically. And then again, we have buttons that are clickable. Again, we need to hook them up. And then we have, again, a sprite 2D, which is just a picture in this case. And then a color rectangle, which is, again, a colored rectangle we can set as a background. I guess the one last thing that we can do is just check to make sure the buttons work. And there should be a hover enabled when I click over them. So I guess we should go into the settings for the colored rectangle and just make sure that under behavior, underneath filter, we're going to go ahead and click ignore. And this just means our mouse will ignore it, regardless of what's going on. And there we go. Now that the background is ignored, we can actually see hover animations. So that's kind of my bad for not mentioning that sooner. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video now when we jump into GDScript and learn how to do programming in order to change between scenes. All right. Thank you.